The White House Deputy Chief of Staff recently said that the Trump administration is actively looking at suspending habeas corpus. Last week, you were asked about this, and I want to clarify your position because it's obviously really important to get this right. So, Secretary Noem, what is habeas corpus?
Well, habeas corpus is a constitutional right that the president has to be able to remove people from this country and suspend their right to.
Let me stop you, ma'am. Habeas corpus, excuse me, that's incorrect.
President Lincoln used it.
Excuse me.
Kristi Noem can't explain habeas corpus, what happens when a government official can't even define one of the most important constitutional protections Americans have. That's exactly what played out when Senator Maggie Hassan asked Kristi Noem about habeas corpus. And Noem's answer wasn't just wrong, it was dangerous. Because if our leaders misunderstand this right, our freedom is at risk.
Habeas corpus is the legal principle that requires that the government provide a public reason for detaining and imprisoning people. If not for that protection, the government could simply arrest people, including American citizens, and hold them indefinitely for no reason. Habeas corpus is the foundational right that separates free societies like America from police states like North Korea. As a senator from the Live Free or Die state, this matters a lot to me and my constituents and to all Americans. So, Secretary Noem, do you support the core protection that habeas corpus provides, that the government must provide a public reason in order to detain and imprison someone?
Yeah, I support habeas corpus. I also recognize that the President of the United States has the authority under the Constitution to decide if it should be suspended or not.
It has never
Let us be clear, though,
it has never been done. It has never been done without approval of Congress. Even Abraham Lincoln got retroactive approval from Congress. So I have been asking executive branch nominees a simple question over the past few months. If the president orders them to break the law, I've been asking, will you follow the law or follow the order? I want to ask you a more specific question here. If the president tries to suspend habeas corpus and a federal court reverses the president's order, will you comply with the court order and uphold habeas corpus, or will you follow the president's directive?
We are following all federal court orders and are complying with that, as is the president, and every decision that I make as well.
That is obviously not true for anybody who reads the news. There are federal court orders right now, including returning somebody who was deported mistakenly. But to be clear, this is about a fundamental legal right that ensures that we live in a free society instead of a police state that would have a sham legal system like Russia or North Korea. So I'm glad that you have now committed to following court orders. I'm glad you believe in the basic freedom for Americans if ordered to do so by a court. And again, I want just to make clear that it is critically important that even if the president tries to suspend the right of people to know why they've been detained or imprisoned, if a federal court reverses that order, that you will follow that order. And I hope all members of the administration will, because it's obviously critical that some of the people, for instance, who've been deported by mistake, who didn't get due process, be returned in compliance with court orders. So now, let's move on to another issue. International criminal organizations target Americans with sophisticated cyber crime, including elaborate scams that robbed Americans of billions of dollars, with seniors in the United States losing $5 billion to scammers in 2024 alone. As artificial intelligence improves, so does the ability of criminals to deceive and defraud Americans. With this new technology, criminals can impersonate loved ones, develop advanced malware, or make more convincing phishing messages. How is DHS working to identify trends in illegal activity and ensure that new AI systems have safeguards in place to prevent their use in criminal activity?
Yes, we are working extensively through CISA, but in all of our agencies to make sure that we're going after these criminal, nefarious actors. I would say partnering with private industry is critically important so that we have the insight that we need to really understand the tactics that they use and the advancements in software. The AI ability that they have to adjust and to supersede some of our systems is incredible. And so investing in those systems is important, but also having the knowledge and bringing everybody to the table and breaking down the silos between our agencies and our intelligence agencies is important, so we all have the information that we need to get.
Well, and that gets me to one final point and question here, because Senator Peters began to ask about it. There's been recent reporting that indicates that the Chinese government installed remote access to Chinese-made power inverters in the U.S., raising concerns that the Chinese government could try to disable parts of our power grid. And you made a comment following up on Senator Peters' question about the importance of not only working with private industry on this issue, as you would also want to work on AI, but also on working with state and local governments on cybersecurity. And can you just talk to me a little bit about how DHS is partnering with state and local governments right now?
Well, that's one of the core critical missions of CISA, is to help those state and local governments harden their systems. We're extremely vulnerable by our weakest link. And so when you have a small state that doesn't have the resources it needs to invest in these security operations, then they're vulnerable to attacks and hacking attempts, and they can access our systems. If they have a contract or a system that interfaces with the federal system, it makes us vulnerable as well. So we are responsible for 10 of the 16 critical infrastructures under the Department of Homeland Security, and making sure that China can't come in and shut down our electrical grid, our water systems, things that people rely on every day for their day-to-day lives is very important. So that's why we need these kind of partnerships, is to make sure that we're secure all the way down to our smallest actor that participates.
What we just witnessed between Senator Maggie Hassan and Secretary Kristi Noem isn't some minor slip-up. It's a moment that goes to the very core of what it means to live in a free society. When Senator Hassan asked Noem to define habeas corpus, Noem's fumbling answer revealed something much larger than a gap in constitutional knowledge. It exposed how fragile our system can become when leaders misunderstand or misrepresent the most fundamental protections Americans rely on. Let's pause for a moment here. Habeas corpus is not some abstract legal term buried in Latin, only relevant to scholars or lawyers. It literally means you have the body. At its heart, it is the principle that the government must provide a lawful reason before locking you up. Without habeas corpus, the government could snatch people off the street, imprison them indefinitely, and never have to explain why. That's not the stuff of free societies. That's the hallmark of authoritarian regimes. Think about it. If habeas corpus didn't exist, there would be nothing stopping a president or a government from targeting political opponents, journalists, or even ordinary citizens, and keeping them behind bars without trial. It's what separates the United States from police states like North Korea or dictatorships that use prisons as tools of control. That's why this principle has been called the Great Writ of Liberty. It is literally a shield that protects every single American regardless of politics. So when Noem incorrectly described habeas corpus as a tool the president can use to suspend rights and remove people from the country, it wasn't just a misstatement, it was a distortion of its meaning, turning a citizen's shield into a weapon of government power. That inversion should concern everyone, because when leaders in power get something this basic wrong, it opens the door to abuse. Senator Hassan's correction was not just about fact-checking Noem, it was about drawing a clear line. In America, power flows from the people, and the government must always be held accountable. Habeas corpus is one of the oldest, most enduring ways we do that. In fact, its roots stretch back to the Magna Carta in 1215, centuries before the United States was even founded. Generations fought and died to preserve this principle precisely because they knew the dangers of unchecked authority. And history tells us something else important. Suspending habeas corpus has only happened in the gravest of crises, like during the Civil War under Abraham Lincoln, and even then, Congress had to give approval. The idea that a president could simply decide to suspend it on their own is not only unconstitutional, it's an open invitation to tyranny. Now let's reflect on why this matters in today's political climate. Senator Hassan brought this up because the Trump administration had openly floated the idea of suspending habeas corpus. That's not just political theater, that is a direct threat to the principle that keeps America a nation of laws, rather than a nation of arbitrary power. When Noem finally said she would comply with court orders, it sounded like reassurance, but her hesitation, her fumbling, and her initial mischaracterization raised real doubts about whether those words would hold under pressure. And that's the danger. When leaders are vague or confused about foundational rights, the public has to remain vigilant, because once rights are eroded, they're not easily won back. Here's the bigger picture. Civic literacy matters. Too many Americans don't know what habeas corpus is, and too many leaders act as if it's optional, but it's not. It is the lifeline that guarantees that we are citizens, not subjects. So here's the takeaway. When someone in power stumbles over something as fundamental as habeas corpus, it's not just embarrassing, it's alarming. It should remind us that democracy isn't self-sustaining. It only survives when people understand their rights and demand that those in power respect them, and that's where you come in. Don't just treat this as another viral political moment. Think about what it reveals. Ask yourself, if leaders misunderstand this today, what else could they misinterpret or undermine tomorrow? Staying informed, asking questions, and holding officials accountable is not optional. It's the only way a free society continues to be free. Habeas corpus, often called the Great Writ, dates back to the Magna Carta of 1215, which limited the English monarchy's power by ensuring no one could be detained without lawful judgment. This principle shaped American law, enshrined in Article 1, Section 9 of the Constitution, which allows suspension only in extreme cases like rebellion or invasion, and even then, only with congressional approval. Historical examples like Lincoln's Civil War suspension were contentious and required oversight. The 1942 internment of Japanese Americans during World War II, bypassing habeas corpus, remains a stark warning of what happens when this right is ignored. Noem's claim that habeas corpus could be used to suspend rights and deport people flips its purpose, suggesting executive overreach. This is especially troubling given reports of the Trump administration considering suspending habeas corpus, evoking fears of policies like the 2018 family separations at the border. Such rhetoric threatens the rule of law, risking a slide toward authoritarianism. Noem's eventual pledge to follow court orders felt hollow after her initial confusion, raising doubts about her commitment. Civic ignorance is a growing problem. A 2023 survey showed only 66% of Americans can name the 3 branches of government, and even fewer understand habeas corpus. When leaders like Noem misrepresent it, it erodes trust, already low, with only 22% of Americans trusting the government per a 2025 poll. Globally, habeas corpus distinguishes democracies from regimes like Russia, where dissenters face arbitrary detention. If U.S. officials mischaracterize it, our global credibility falters. This moment demands action. Learn about habeas corpus through sources like the National Constitution Center, contact officials to demand clarity, and share this issue to raise awareness. Democracy thrives on informed citizens who hold leaders accountable. Noem's fumble isn't just a gaffe, it's a warning. Let's keep questioning, stay vigilant, and protect our rights. Subscribe for more deep dives into what keeps our democracy strong.